you, of course, are a mom now, too. You have two kids, Dexter and Duke, right?
Right.
You adopted your first child when you were 50. What motivated you to do that at that point in your life?
After the funeral, Diane Keaton's daughter revealed the one thing her mother never dared say out loud. And it changes everything. Wait, didn't the world know Diane Keaton? The woman who laughed too loudly, who made clumsiness fashionable, who wore courage like a second skin, the muse of Woody Allen, the star of Annie Hall, the eccentric who redefined what it meant to be both powerful and vulnerable on screen? We thought we knew her. But what if every public smile, every witty remark, was part of a delicate disguise? One built to protect something far more fragile. Behind the turtlenecks, the charm, and the Oscars, there was a silence so loud it almost had a heartbeat. A silence that hid stories Diane never shared, regrets she never voiced, and truths Hollywood wasn't ready to hear. Because for all her fame, Diane's life was not just a Hollywood fairy tale. It was a portrait of solitude, sacrifice, and secret pain. And the one person who truly understood that? Her daughter. The woman who sat beside her when the cameras were gone, who heard the unspoken words between sighs, and who, after the funeral, finally decided the world needed to hear the truth. What she revealed wasn't gossip, it was revelation. And it changed everything we thought we knew about Diane Keaton, the woman behind the legend. To the world, Diane Keaton was a force, an Academy Award winner, a style rebel, a woman who made being single at 50 look like a victory instead of a verdict. She was the definition of self-made, a woman who didn't need a husband, didn't chase validation, and somehow made oversized suits and turtlenecks look more glamorous than any red carpet gown. She was admired, quoted, imitated. But what if the image we saw wasn't the full picture? As her daughter Dexter would later admit, people loved the version of my mother they thought they knew. I loved the one they didn't. That one sentence breaks open the carefully constructed mythology around Diane Keaton. The woman the public embraced was real, but incomplete. Because while Diane's public persona radiated strength, independence, and charm, her private world told a different story. A story of someone who often gave more than she received, who was always the first to encourage others, but rarely allowed herself to be comforted. Diane's life wasn't just a Hollywood dream. It was also a quiet heartbreak, stitched together with laughter, sacrifice, and, ironically, profound loneliness. She wasn't bitter about it. She didn't wallow. But behind her wit and wisdom lived a soft ache. The ache of love lost, of time sacrificed, of being the one who stayed strong for everyone else. While others saw her as the woman who never needed anyone, Dexter saw the truth, someone who had simply learned to live gracefully with unmet needs. The truth is, Diane didn't wear her pain on her sleeve. She folded it neatly, tucked it beneath the laughter, and kept walking. Because that's who she was. Not just a legend, but a human being quietly surviving the weight of everything she never said out loud, the wall of privacy. When Diane adopted Dexter at age 50, Hollywood gasped. A single woman, no husband, no plan, just a decision. And not a decision driven by image, narrative, or career revival, but by something far more personal, something real. At a time when most celebrities were clinging to youth or chasing legacy projects, Diane made a choice that didn't fit the Hollywood script. But she didn't blink. She didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. She later joked, "The longest relationship I've ever had is with my work." A line delivered with her signature dry wit. But beneath it lived a truth she rarely shared. That career had been her anchor, her purpose, her escape, until Dexter arrived, and suddenly The woman who had spent decades disappearing into characters found the only role that asked her to show up as her full self. Mother. Not just in title, in ritual, in milk warming, in school lunches, in sitting quietly beside a child after a hard day, in tiny daily acts of love that no director could script. She once said, "You don't need to give birth to be someone's mother. You just need to love them so much it hurts." And she did, every day, fiercely, quietly, without applause. Motherhood, for Diane, wasn't for the public. It wasn't performance. It was private, sacred. She had lived long enough to know that the world doesn't always deserve your softest parts, so she kept them safe. Away from headlines, away from cameras, away from judgment. She wasn't hiding. She was preserving. And that difference? That tells you everything about who she really was. Dexter remembers the rules. They weren't written down, but they were crystal clear. No interviews, no paparazzi, no red carpets, no magazine covers, no bending for the public gaze. While other celebrity children grew up beneath the glare of flashing bulbs, Dexter and her brother grew up in a carefully crafted bubble, one their mother protected with quiet, relentless intention. Diane didn't just avoid the spotlight when it came to her kids. She built walls around them with love, privacy, and purpose. She wanted them to live in a world where no one whispered their mother's name like it was a brand, where they could be themselves before the world tried to tell them who they were supposed to be. She used to say, "Peace is more precious than popularity. The final years, fading light." In her final years, Diane's sparkle dimmed. Not with drama, not all at once, but slowly, quietly, like a candle flickering in a sunlit room, unseen until the flame was gone. The woman who once lit up screens with wit, warmth, and fearless individuality began to retreat into herself. Illness crept in like fog under a door. At first, it was little things, forgetting names, skipping meals, misplacing a favorite book. Then, her once steady hands began to tremble. Her signature walk softened into a shuffle. Her voice, once so full of bite and brilliance, grew faint, like she was saving her energy for something more important than words. Dexter noticed it all. Every hesitation, every wince, every time her mother smiled through pain. And still, Diane would say, "Sweetheart, I'm just a little tired today," as if that weariness were nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. It was the weight of decades she had carried alone. And where was Hollywood? Silent. The same industry that once fought for her presence at premieres, who hailed her as a genius, a muse, a legend. They didn't send flowers. They didn't call. No colleagues came knocking. It was as if the moment she stepped away from the camera, she ceased to exist in their world. Dexter, holding her mother's hand in those final months, realized something gut-wrenching. The world mourned her too late. It wasn't that Diane needed attention. She never asked for applause, but the absence, the stark emptiness where connection should have been, cut deeper than criticism ever could. In the end, the woman who gave so much to so many left quietly, almost invisibly, surrounded not by fame, but by the only thing that ever truly mattered to her: her children. The Secret Notebook. After Diane's passing, Dexter did what so many grieving children do. She wandered through the echoes of her mother's life, opening drawers that hadn't been touched in months, running her fingers across old photographs, reading half-written notes in the margins of film scripts, carefully folding scarves that still carried the faintest trace of Chanel No. 5. There was comfort in the routine of remembering. But then, in the back of Diane's study, tucked beneath a pile of old movie stills, Dexter found something different. A leather-bound notebook, aged and worn, tied shut with a thin silver ribbon. It wasn't labeled, it wasn't dated, but it carried a weight the other items didn't. When Dexter untied the ribbon and opened the cover, the scent of old perfume escaped, like a breath held too long. The first page stopped her cold. One name, written in her mother's handwriting, again and again. Al Pacino. The loops of each letter delicate, almost tender, like she had written them in moments of both hope and heartbreak. The man who had entered her life with quiet intensity and, despite everything, never fully left it. They met on the set of The Godfather, two rising stars in a cinematic universe that would go on to redefine American film. Diane was luminous, quirky, fresh. Al was magnetic in a way that didn't ask for attention, but somehow commanded it anyway. She once said, "He never looked straight at the camera, but he made the whole world look at him." There was something untouchable about him, and that made her want to get closer. Their connection wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need headlines to prove it existed. Their love was chaotic, passionate, quietly destructive. The kind of love that burns under the surface, slow, smoldering, dangerous in its silence. They lived together in Rome for a time, laughed in borrowed kitchens, shared mornings over bitter coffee and jazz records. Diane wrote, "He made me feel like a 25-year-old girl forever." And that was the beauty and the tragedy, because Al had a way of pulling her back into youth, into possibility, even when she knew it wasn't built to last. He left, often, without reason, without warning. And every time, she waited. Marriage or goodbye? She finally asked him, in a moment when she thought love might win. He said nothing. Not anger, not rejection. Just a silence that felt like a locked door she would never open. That silence, she wrote, cut deeper than any insult ever could. Because silence is harder to argue with. It doesn't break your heart in a single moment. It leaves it unanswered, unresolved. And Diane, the woman who always had words, suddenly had none. She never asked him again, because she already knew. And yet, some part of her kept loving him anyway. Dexter asked her once, in the quiet way daughters sometimes do when they're old enough to notice the gaps in their parents' lives, "Why did you never marry?" Diane didn't pause. She just smiled, that soft, knowing smile that held both humor and heartbreak. And really, what more could she say? Her greatest love had already come and gone, not in flames, but in a slow, aching fade out. She had given everything to it, her vulnerability, her trust, her patience, her silence. There was nothing left to offer anyone else, not in the way that mattered. Imagine living a life where your deepest love story is also your deepest wound, where the person who once made you feel infinite becomes the ghost you quietly carry through every season of your life. Would you dare to try again? Diane didn't. Not because she couldn't, but because she chose not to. And for Diane, love wasn't something to chase anymore. It was something to protect, something to give, not to demand. She saved what was left of her heart for her children, the other silence, her struggle with self. What most people didn't know, what even close friends missed, was Diane's decades-long battle with bulimia. It began in her mid-20s, around the same time she was being told by casting agents that she was too different, too awkward, or too much. Hollywood praised her uniqueness, but behind closed doors, it demanded perfection, thinness, control, silence. In one of her private writings, Diane confessed, "I ate to fill the spaces where love didn't reach." The loneliness, the unspoken griefs, the heartbreaks. She swallowed them down in secrecy, masked by her public charm. It wasn't vanity, It was survival, a way to feel something in the quiet, a way to punish herself for feelings she couldn't explain. This wasn't in the tabloids. It wasn't mentioned in interviews. She never made it part of her brand, but it haunted her. Quietly, faithfully, for decades. After Diane's passing, Dexter found fragments of that pain hidden in old journals. Pages written in shaky, uneven handwriting. One line in particular stood out. "Beauty gave me a career and slowly took my joy." That sentence, Dexter later said, broke her. Because the world adored her mother's image, but never saw what it cost to maintain. Diane had worn laughter like armor. She disarmed people with wit, with charm, with oversized hats and ironic detachment. But underneath, there were cracks, small, invisible fractures in a woman who had carried too much for too long, and had smiled through it all because that's what was expected. Despite her pain, despite the silence, the heartbreak, and the private battles no one saw, Diane loved her children with a depth that healed her in places no man ever could. She didn't love loudly. She wasn't the kind of mother who made grand gestures or performed motherhood for others. Her love lived in the quiet, in the ordinary, and that made it extraordinary. Every morning, like clockwork, Dexter would wake up to a message from her mother. "Have you had water today? It's a beautiful day. Don't miss it." Not dramatic, not profound, but deeply, stubbornly consistent. A soft reminder that someone was watching over you, even when the world wasn't. After her death, those messages became holes in Dexter's day, gaps that no one else knew existed, spaces where love used to live. And that's the thing, isn't it? The people we miss the most often aren't missed for the big moments, but for the little ones. The texts, the glances, the quiet routines. Are there people in your life who you'll miss most for the little things? If there are, maybe today's the day to tell them. Because someday, their smallest gestures might just become your loudest memories. The final morning. October 11th. The morning was quiet, golden, almost sacred. The kind of light that doesn't shout, but gently wraps itself around everything it touches. Sunlight filtered through the linen curtains, casting soft patterns on the floor. The scent of black tea lingered in the kitchen. Her favorite blend, still warm in the cup. Dexter moved through the house like she always did, expecting her mother to be somewhere between her morning routine and her next memory. But when she reached the sitting room, everything shifted. There was Diane, in her armchair, calm, eyes closed, her hands resting gently on the arms of the chair, like she had simply paused mid-thought. Beside her, a half-written journal lay open, the pen resting diagonally across the page. She was gone, peacefully, completely, beautifully. News broke within hours. The kind of breaking news that doesn't shock so much as it stings. Because deep down, people knew the world was running out of women like Diane Keaton. Social media lit up with black and white photos, iconic quotes, clips from Annie Hall and The Godfather. Celebrities posted tributes. Fans wrote essays. Journalists scrambled to summarize a life that refused to be simplified. But amid all the tributes, one name remained unspoken. One voice painfully absent. Al Pacino. No statements, no interviews, not even a quiet acknowledgement on social media. Just silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than words. For Dexter, that collective grief felt like a performance too late for its curtain. Because while the world mourned her now, it hadn't noticed her fading. It hadn't visited. It hadn't called. She didn't say much. There were no interviews, no long statements, no teary red carpet tributes. She didn't need to speak. Her silence carried more truth than any headline. because Dexter had already mourned her mother, not just in death, but in those final months of watching her be forgotten while she was still alive. 3 days later, on October 14th, 2025, the world finally said goodbye. The ceremony wasn't a spectacle. It was intimate, poetic, and profoundly Diane. Her family chose a small seaside garden overlooking the Pacific, surrounded by whispering olive trees that seemed to bow gently in the wind. The choice of location said everything: quiet, timeless, far from the blinding flash of cameras and the glamour she'd always found hollow. It was a place where you could hear the ocean breathe, a sanctuary where peace felt earned. Friends came quietly, bringing flowers instead of speeches. A few neighbors stopped by with tears in their eyes, leaving handwritten notes tucked between the roots of the tree. The air smelled faintly of lavender and rain. Jazz music played softly from an old record player in the house, her favorite Miles Davis tune looping in the background. Inside, everything was still. The house stood like a museum of memories, photo albums open on tables, scripts scattered across her desk, a pair of glasses resting beside an unfinished cup of tea. Her 1960s Mercedes, polished and perfect, sat in the driveway, as if waiting for one last drive through Los Angeles. Dexter and Duke decided not to change a thing. Let it be her echo, they said.